Hello and welcome back to Troughton Month. I hope you've enjoyed the content from all the other members, and Will of course. He's done some amazing stuff as well. Anyways, since this is Troughton Month, I wanted to take a look at the weird side of his era, and how weirder can you get than this comic story? This is the Nightwalkers. So, a little bit of context for those not in the know. During the show's early years, the BBC would license out the show to other companies to get them to provide the viewing public with the merchandise. There were board games, books, and even a Dalek costume in stores for everyone to buy. But what about the continuing adventures of the Doctor and chums? How were the viewing public going to get their slice of Doctor Who when it wasn't on TV? Well, luck was in hand in 1965 when Doctor Who joined the ranks of TV Comic, a weekly magazine filled with comics from numerous TV shows which now include the ranks of Doctor Who. However, instead of the first Doctor being with Ian, Barbara, Susan, or Stephen and Vicky, the Doctor travelled with his other grandchildren, John and Gillian Who. Yeah, don't ask why, not even the show recognises them as canon anyways, and that's saying something when Dimensions in Time is canon. But, after the massive 3 years spent with John and Gillian and the staggering 6 months spent with Jamie, with some adventures alone of course, the comics had caught up to where we were in the TV continuity, with the Doctor's exile, but his face had never changed. That was until we got to this strip. The Nightwalkers, written by Roger Noel Cook with John Cannon doing the artwork, was the last of the second Doctor's Adventures in the TV Comics universe, as it was released between the 8th and the 22nd of November 1969, about a month before Jon Pertwee would make his debut as the third incarnation of the Time Lord. A brief summary of the comic is that basically that the Doctor, or Doctor Who's the comic likes to call him, appears on a mystery panel show to find a farmer scared by his scarecrows walking about at night. The Doctor decides to help him and then gets entangled in another mess with some people who are very familiar to him. So, as a story, it's very basic, but what I think works well about it is the fact that it unravels the more you read along. It has that great sense of build-up throughout the story as we learn what has occurred and what will happen as the Doctor takes on an investigation to help Mr. Hogan the farmer about his curious claims. However, one thing I don't like about the strip is the dialogue. Most of it seems a bit put on with stereotypes of characters, like the obnoxious panel show host who reminds me more of Jimmy Carr than anyone I'd rather find suited to watching, and Mr. Hogan himself, who's basically just a farmer and that's just really it for his character. It seems that the Doctor is the only fleshed out character here as he's the main star of this one. He has a couple of good moments here, mostly in the first part, where he rumbles an old lady's mystery by simple ideas deduction.
Just as I thought. I think the banging you hear within your walls every Friday night is probably the lodger taking his weekly bath. Old places like yours tend to have noisy plumbing, Miss Swiggins.
To being the one to convince Mr. Hogan of his help by telling him that he's the only one who properly listened to his curious anecdote.
Wait a minute, Hogan. I'm not one of those who laughed. Take me to your farm. This scarecrow affair interests me.
But of course, the one thing that does catch everybody's eye about the adventure is the artwork. What can I say, but if you've seen a TV comic strip before, you'll probably remember the very weird details of them. The faces, the bodies, and some of the weird effects that they try to visualise. And this one certainly has it here, including such examples as scared old woman pulling her face like it's the cliffhanger to Trial of a Time Lord. The Doctor having a really long deduction face. Mr. Hogan looked like he's the next candidate to be in the opening titles after the Doctor. And my favourite, which is the Doctor's face when he finds out the scarecrows haunting Mr. Hogan are actually the servants of the Time Lords. It's probably one of the most memorable faces of the TV comic era, so you can thank this strip for providing it. Now, let's talk about these scarecrows that Mr. Hogan is going on about. As you know, scarecrows by themselves are not all that scary in all honesty, but Doctor Who has shown that they can make them chilling, like in the story Human Nature, where thanks to some very memorable directing and choreography, they end up making them rather unsettling to say the least. And I won't be the first to admit that when I first watched that story, they did terrify me for the 2 weeks that they were on screen. So, what about these scarecrows then? Well, they get activated by a massive swirling light, talk about needing Doctor Who, and then they carry him to his TARDIS. I'm gonna admit, that's the least hair-raising thing that they can do, and that's taking into account the time that the Master dressed up as one in Mark the Rani. But these scarecrows turn out to be servants of the Time Lords, as it turns out they've actually caught up with the exiled Doctor before he could change his appearance. And that's what they end up doing for essentially the last page. The second Doctor is there no more, as he starts his regeneration with his attempted to bridge the gap to where we see Jon Pertwee's Doctor at the beginning of Spearhead. Does this mean I count this as an actual canon regeneration?
No.
But what about the fact that the Doctor escaped his exile? Does this mean I count this as part of the very elusive Season 6B? Well...
You'll have to ask a better man than me.
So overall, I think this is a nice but weird story that tries to answer what happened between the end of the War Games and the beginning of Spearheads from Space. And I think it's nice to attempt to do it in a very weird but truly Doctor Who way. However, the constraints of the comic strip really come to suffer when we only have 2 pages and 3 parts to tell the story. Had this been the length of a usual Doctor Who magazine comic strip, then perhaps we could have seen an even more terrifying but weird tale at hand. But if you found this interesting, I would have a look for the original adventure, which was published in TV comic issues 934 to 936. Unfortunately, it was never re-released or put into a compilation like the Doctor Who magazine strips seem to be, so you'll have to go for that route to find them. Sorry about that. Anyways, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope you enjoyed the rest of Troughton Month.
Be seeing you, my friend.
By the way, sorry for this one being very short. The next one next month will probably be longer, I promise.